Hey boys and girls, here we are on Unit 6, which is about the Roman Republic / Roman Empire. So this unit, like the last one on ancient Greece, is kind of thick, lots of information. So again, stay on top of your notes, make sure you're watching the videos and getting them filled in, etc. Anyway, so let's jump right into it. The Rise of Rome, Part 1. Okay, Rome, like pretty much every other early civilization that we have talked about, had some geographical features that protected it from invasion and formed those natural barriers. The Alps, which are mountains in the Mediterranean Sea, provided protection for Rome. So that's pretty much all you need to know geographically about how that influenced Rome. Rome was an ideal location. The city of Rome, with its ideal location on the Italian peninsula, was able to extend its influence over the entire Mediterranean basin. So basically, the Italian peninsula is smack dab in the middle of the Mediterranean, which gave it Rome an ideal position to kind of control and dominate things. Sticking out of the Mediterranean Sea, the Italian peninsula was ideal for seaborne commerce, meaning they traded a lot using boats, much like the Greeks, much like the Phoenicians. And it was also distant from Eastern Mediterranean powers, and we'll talk about those later. The beginnings of Rome, there's a legend which we're going to just touch on briefly here. According to legend, Rome was founded by twin brothers, by the Latins Romulus and Remus, and they were raised by a wolf, and there's all kinds of stories about how they competed to each build a city and things of that nature. It's actually pretty interesting, but we don't have time to go into it here. The three early groups of people that helped form and lay the foundation for the Roman Empire were the Greeks, the Etruscans, and the Latins. And all three of these were on the Italian peninsula. Now, as you may guess, the Greeks had a very strong influence. They established 50 colonies or settlements in Italy. And you can see here on the map, here's the Italian peninsula, here's the Balkan peninsula, and very easy for the Greeks to set up those colonies, which we talked about last unit. These colonies traded with the peoples of the Italian peninsula. How did Greek culture most influence Roman culture? Gods and myths were adapted from the Greeks, and art and architecture were copied from the Greeks. Okay, so the Romans were polytheistic up until this guy called Jesus Christ comes around, and they had gods and goddesses as well. Eventually, the Etruscans and Latins battled for supremacy of the Italian peninsula. The Etruscans were native to northern Italy, and the Etruscan kings ruled over the Latins for hundreds of years. Eventually, the Latins kind of rose up, defeated the Etruscans, and started their own republic, which again is where people decide what type of government they want. So the rise of the Republic. From 509 BC to 44 BC, Rome's government was a republic, a form of representative democracy where the people had the power to vote and choose leaders. Okay, so we're not in the Roman Empire phase yet. That's will be coming up here shortly. But for a while, they had a republic where people chose, I should say, the rich landowners and things like that. Who could be? The 12 Tables. Okay, the 12 Tables was the basis for Roman law, and it was a set of laws and rules that said all free citizens were protected by the law. So it's kind of like a very early version of the Bill of Rights. These are what the laws are, these are what protections you have, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about the 12 Tables later. Who could be a citizen if you were in Rome? Patrician and plebeian men, some foreigners. If you were a citizen, you had two responsibilities: pay your taxes and military service. Simple enough. Now, the main two groups that really struggle to share power or get some of the power for themselves were the patricians. They were the powerful nobility and few in number. So, kind of like every other society, you had a few rich people at the top controlling things, and they held up most of the power. Then you had the plebeians, which was the majority of people, and this was a group with no power. Or they had very little, and they certainly tried to change that quite a bit through democratic processes, discussions, debates, things like that. Then the last group is the slaves. Obviously, they wouldn't really struggle for power since they had none to really struggle for. But anyway, so the plebeians were kind of like your middle, lower classes. The patricians were your upper class. Good way to remember patrician, where it says the R-I-C there, just add an H, patrich, rich, patricians, if you will. And slavery in the Roman Empire was, again, not based on any particular race. All right. Roman government had three parts to it. Excuse me. They had two consuls, or officials, that were elected for 1-year terms. These were kind of like presidents, if you will. They led the army and ran the government. Then you had the Senate, which was mostly patricians, and they controlled public spending and decided foreign policy. And foreign policy is like, hey, do we want to trade with these countries? Do we want to work with these colonies? Do we want to go to war? Etc. And the third part, which came around a little bit after the Senate, was the Assembly. And these were mostly plebeians, and they voted and elected officials. Over time, the plebeians elected officials to represent them and check the power of the Senate. So after a while, the plebeians were able to get some of that representation in the government that they were seeking. The Senate didn't have supreme and absolute power. Over time, the plebeians were able to kind of keep the patricians in check, so to speak. Okay, so that's the brief introduction of the Roman Republic / Empire. The basic stuff that we've always kind of talked about: location, some of the early influences, some of the early people, the forms of government, and who could not be citizens. Obviously, there's the map. Make sure you know those items. Okay, there will be a map quiz, and obviously there will be questions on the map questions on the test. So finish these notes up. If you need to go back and check some things out, feel free to do so, and see you next time.